He thought he was buying a pile of worthless junk for just a few dollars. But the moment the rusted door creaked open, Mark's life changed forever. What was supposed to be nothing more than a gamble, a desperate attempt to turn his luck around, became a discovery that would haunt him for the rest of his days. At the edge of town, under a pale grey sky, a row of forgotten storage units stood like silent tombs, each hiding fragments of lives long abandoned. The wind rattled the metal doors, carrying whispers of stories left behind. Most were filled with broken furniture, mouldy boxes, or relics no one wanted. But one container, one was different. Mark didn't know it yet, but behind that rusted door lay a mystery older and deeper than he could imagine. A mystery worth more than gold, but with a price far higher than he was prepared to pay. As he raised his hand to place his first bid, he had no way of knowing that he wasn't just buying a storage unit. He was unlocking a secret that would test his courage, his morality, and even his sanity. And once it was opened, there would be no turning back. Mark sat on the edge of his worn-out bed, his hands hanging loosely between his knees, staring at the faded carpet beneath his feet. The morning light crept through the blinds in weak, uneven stripes, casting shadows that made the small apartment look even smaller. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of yesterday's reheated dinner and something deeper, the quiet tension that had settled between these walls for years. His wife was already gone, having left for work before dawn. She didn't kiss him goodbye anymore. She barely spoke to him at all these days. Her absence wasn't just physical. It lingered like a sharp, invisible accusation in every corner of their home. On the dresser, a stack of unopened bills sat like a silent threat, the top envelope stamped with bold red letters, "Final Notice." Mark didn't have to open it to know what it said. Another overdue payment. Another failure. He caught his reflection in the cracked mirror across the room and almost didn't recognize the man staring back at him. Grey streaked his hair, deeper lines etched into his forehead than he remembered. He was only in his 40s, but life had aged him faster than years ever could. His hands were rough and calloused from decades of manual labor, yet despite all his effort, there was no pride in them. Only fatigue. Mark worked a massive warehouse on the edge of town, loading and unloading trucks for people who didn't even bother to remember his name. To them, he was just another pair of hands, another body to move heavy boxes. The paychecks came like clockwork, barely enough to cover rent, groceries, and the endless cycle of small debts that had somehow grown into a crushing mountain. Every month, he shuffled money between bills, playing a game he never won. The credit card balances kept growing like weeds, no matter how hard he tried to trim them down. Sometimes, late at night, he would sit at the kitchen table with a calculator and a pounding headache, staring at numbers that didn't add up, wondering how his life had come to this. At home, things weren't much better. His wife had grown tired of empty promises and words without solutions. Her glances were sharp now, her silences louder than her anger had ever been. Their teenage daughter avoided bringing friends over, embarrassed by the peeling paint on the walls and the mismatched, second-hand furniture. Mark wasn't a bad man. He hadn't gambled away their money, hadn't drowned his sorrows in alcohol. He had simply failed. Failed to get ahead. Failed to give them the life they deserved. Every day felt the same. Wake up before the sun, drag himself to work, return home exhausted, and collapse into bed, only to repeat the cycle again. It wasn't living. It was existing. And the terrifying part was that there seemed to be no way out. Still, deep down, buried beneath the exhaustion and bitterness, there was a spark of longing. Mark didn't crave luxury or extravagance. He just wanted one clean breath without the choking grip of bills and debt. A single chance to change everything. It was during one of those endless, grey afternoons at the warehouse that he overheard a conversation that would set everything in motion. Two of his co-workers stood nearby, laughing loudly, their voices cutting through the monotonous clatter of machinery. They were bragging about a recent auction one of them had attended. "Picked up a whole storage unit for peanuts," one of them said, grinning. "Thought it was junk, but inside? Man, you wouldn't believe it. Antique furniture, some collectibles, sold half of it for a huge profit." Mark pretended not to listen, keeping his eyes on the box he was lifting, but his ears strained to catch every word. The other man snorted. "Yeah, sometimes you score big. People just walk away from these units, forget to pay rent, or lose track of what's inside. Then the storage company auctions them off. Most of the time you get garbage, but once in a while." His voice trailed off, leaving the possibility hanging in the air like a tantalizing secret. That night, Mark lay awake long after his wife had drifted into a restless sleep beside him. The warehouse sounds replayed in his mind, the echo of laughter, the promise of easy money. It sounded ridiculous, almost like a scam. Who would abandon anything truly valuable? And yet, the idea gnawed at him. What if it wasn't just a tall tale? What if there was something out there, waiting to be found? By the next morning, the thought had rooted itself firmly in his mind. Mark began researching storage auctions during his breaks at work, reading about the process. You couldn't touch anything inside, just look for a few seconds when the door rolled up, then bid purely on instinct. It was a gamble, exactly the kind of risk Mark had never taken before. He didn't have savings, but he did have one last sliver of credit on his card and a dangerous willingness to take a chance. The following week, he drove to the edge of town where rows of storage units stretched endlessly like a graveyard of forgotten lives. His car, dented and coughing smoke, looked pathetic parked between the shiny trucks of seasoned bidders. The others moved with confidence, talking loudly, trading stories of their past wins and laughing at rookies who had wasted money on worthless junk. Mark kept his head down, trying to appear calm while his heart hammered in his chest. The cold morning air smelled of rust and dust, a scent that clung to the back of his throat as he walked toward the crowd. He didn't know it yet, but before this day ended, his life would split in two, the man he had been before and the man he was about to become. The auction began with a burst of noise, the auctioneer's sharp, practiced voice cutting through the crisp morning air like a blade. Mark stood near the back of the crowd, trying to blend in, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets to hide their trembling. Around him, the other bidders moved with casual confidence. They joked, traded gossip, and tossed out bids without hesitation. Mark felt like an intruder in a world he didn't belong to. The first few units were opened quickly. The metal doors rattled and groaned as they rolled up, revealing cramped spaces filled with the remnants of lives long forgotten. Stacks of moldy cardboard boxes, broken furniture with splintered legs, an old, rusted lawn mower sitting crookedly in a corner. Each time, the auctioneer barely paused before calling out the starting bid. Prices rose fast, far higher than anything Mark was willing, or able, to risk. Within minutes, those containers were sold to veterans who barely glanced inside before claiming their prize. Mark's hope began to fade. He wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake, if he should just turn around, climb into his dented car, and drive away before making a fool of himself. He was ready to leave when a worker reached for the latch of another unit. The hinges creaked loudly, almost as if protesting, and the door jerked upward to reveal the contents within. At first glance, it looked just like the others, maybe even worse. A broken bicycle lay on its side, the paint chipped and the tires flat. An old armchair sagged in one corner, its torn upholstery spilling yellowed stuffing like disease clouds. A warped cabinet with one missing door leaned precariously against the wall, its shelves coated in thick dust. A few crushed cardboard boxes slumped nearby, their tops caved in from weight and moisture. The crowd shifted impatiently. Someone muttered, "Useless junk." Another man chuckled and turned away, already dismissing it. But Mark didn't move. There was something about this unit, something he couldn't explain. It wasn't just the contents, it was the feel of the place. While everyone else saw trash, Mark felt an odd pull, a whisper of possibility cutting through the stale air. Maybe it was desperation speaking. Maybe it was pure instinct. Whatever it was, he couldn't walk away. The auctioneer barked out the opening bid, the lowest of the day. Silence followed. No one raised a hand. Mark's throat went dry. He hesitated, glancing around, half expecting someone else to jump in at the last second. But the crowd remained still, uninterested. Taking a shaky breath, Mark raised his hand. The auctioneer's sharp eyes locked on him. "Do I hear another bid?" The crowd murmured but stayed quiet. "Sold." The gavel came down with a sharp crack, echoing down the row of storage units. Just like that, it was over. The other bidders dispersed, already turning their attention to the next unit down the line. Mark remained frozen in place, his heart pounding. The container was his now. And as he stared at the dark interior, a heavy weight settled on his shoulders, a mix of fear and anticipation. He wasn't sure whether to laugh at his foolishness or tremble at the thought of what he might find. As the last voices faded into the distance, Mark stood alone in front of the rusted door. The smell of mildew and dust thickened in his lungs as he stepped forward, crossing the threshold. Inside, the gloom closed around him. Dust floated in slow spirals through thin beams of light seeping past the doorframe. Mark's boots crunched softly on the gritty floor. At first, it was exactly what it seemed: junk. He nudged aside a box filled with moth-eaten clothes, the fabric crumbling at his touch. A battered suitcase yielded nothing but brittle newspapers and a pair of cracked shoes. Each discovery chipped away at his hope. His stomach twisted with every worthless object he uncovered. He had risked what little he had left for this? The voice in his head grew louder with every passing second. "You're a fool, Mark. You should have walked away." He almost did. Almost turned around and left the whole mess behind. And then, he saw them. Half hidden beneath a stack of warped wooden planks in the far corner sat 3 large wooden crates. They were unlike anything else in the unit. Solid, heavy, carefully constructed, their corners reinforced with tarnished metal brackets. The lids were nailed shut, as if someone had gone to great lengths to keep them sealed. Mark's pulse quickened. These weren't random piles of junk. These belonged. He crouched down, brushing away cobwebs with trembling fingers. The wood was dark with age, rough beneath his touch. Whoever had left these here hadn't wanted them opened. At least, not easily. Grabbing a piece of broken metal from the bicycle frame, Mark jammed it beneath the lid and began to pry. The nails resisted at first, groaning in protest. With a final, desperate shove, one side gave way with a loud crack. The lid splintered. Mark leaned over, breathless, and peered inside. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. Nestled within faded cloth were small leather pouches, each one heavy and bulging. He reached for one, his fingers trembling, and loosened the drawstring. Golden coins spilled into his palm. They caught the dim light with a muted gleam, etched with strange, faded designs. The weight was undeniable. The reality hit him like a physical blow. Gold. Real gold. Mark's vision swam. For a heartbeat, he thought he might faint. He tipped the pouch further, and more coins slid out, clinking softly as they hit the wooden floor. His chest tightened, caught between exhilaration and fear. As he turned back to the crate, his eyes caught other shapes beneath the coins, objects carefully wrapped in cloth and paper. He unwrapped one bundle and froze. In his hands was a silver goblet, tarnished but ornate, engraved with intricate patterns that shimmered faintly even in the dusty light. Another cloth revealed a necklace with a deep blue gemstone, its beauty almost unreal. Mark's breath came in shallow, disbelieving gasps. He didn't know how or why this treasure was here, but he knew one thing for certain. His life would never be the same again. Mark's hands wouldn't stop shaking. The gold coins, the silver goblet, the necklace, they didn't feel real. For a long moment, he simply crouched there, staring at the glittering pile, half expecting it to vanish like a cruel hallucination. But it didn't vanish. It was solid, heavy, undeniable. He stumbled back, nearly tripping over the broken bicycle behind him. His breath came in quick, shallow gasps, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst through his chest. This isn't possible, he thought. No one just abandons something like this. The rest of the storage unit faded from his mind. All he could see were the coins and the objects hidden beneath them. Driven by a frantic mix of greed and disbelief, he tore into the other crates, splintering the old wood with his makeshift crowbar. Each one revealed more wonders. Paintings wrapped in yellowed fabric, their gilded frames chipped but still gleaming faintly beneath the grime. Books bound in cracked leather, their spines embossed with fading gold lettering. Stacks of envelopes tied with twine, each stuffed with delicate, intricate postage stamps. Small boxes filled with silver cutlery, jewelry, and trinkets from another age. The dust that had once seemed suffocating now felt like a veil lifting to reveal a hidden world. Mark was no longer standing in a storage unit filled with junk. He was kneeling in a vault of history, surrounded by the remnants of lives long past. For a moment, pure euphoria consumed him. This was more than treasure, it was salvation. He could finally pay off every debt, give his wife and daughter the life they deserved, escape the grinding monotony of the warehouse forever. But as the rush of excitement faded, a strange unease crept in. Mark's gaze drifted to the far corner of the container, to the shabby furniture and broken toys piled haphazardly near the entrance. It hit him then. Those worthless items weren't there by accident. They were a disguise. A smokescreen to hide the real contents of the unit. Whoever had packed this treasure had done so deliberately, carefully, and then vanished. Mark's excitement curdled into dread. The question that had been nagging at him from the start now roared in his mind. Why would anyone abandon this? He gathered some of the smaller items, a few pouches of gold, a bundle of letters, a small painting wrapped tightly in cloth, and hurried them to his car, constantly glancing over his shoulder. Every shadow seemed alive, every passing car a threat. By the time he slammed his trunk shut, sweat soaked through his shirt despite the cool evening air. The lot was nearly empty now, the other bidders long gone. Mark drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles ached. When he reached his garage, he carried the crates inside one by one, moving quickly, almost feverishly, like a man possessed. He locked the door behind him, then sat down on a stool, staring at the collection spread before him under the weak light of a single hanging bulb. Only now, in the privacy of his own space, did he dare to open the bundle of letters. The paper was brittle with age, yellowed at the edges, the ink faded but still legible. The handwriting varied, sometimes neat and flowing, sometimes rushed and uneven, but the words were filled with emotion. Mark read in silence, his eyes darting across the pages. The letters told stories of a single family spanning generations. Quarrels over land and inheritance. Bitter arguments about marriages and alliances. Debts that grew faster than anyone could repay. Betrayals that tore brothers and sisters apart. One letter spoke of a family estate lost after years of court battles. Another hinted at treachery, a relative who had secretly sold off property that wasn't theirs to sell. Some letters were tender and loving, filled with hope. Others dripped with bitterness and rage. With every page, Mark felt like an intruder, peering into lives that had long since ended. Among the documents, he found photographs, small, curled at the corners, the images faded almost to nothing. Solemn men in dark suits. Women in long dresses with lace collars. Children clutching toys, their expressions caught somewhere between innocence and fear. One photograph showed a large family gathered in a garden, frozen forever in stiff smiles, the past captured in sepia tones. Mark stared at those faces, searching for meaning. Who were they? What had happened to them? And why had all they owned been reduced to dust and silence inside a forgotten container? The excitement he had felt hours earlier now twisted into something darker. These weren't just objects. They were fragments of a legacy, pieces of real lives once lived. He wasn't just a lucky man who'd stumbled across a fortune. He was holding someone else's history, someone else's story. And someone, somewhere, might still be looking for it. Over the next few days, Mark became obsessed. Each night after his family went to bed, he locked himself in the garage and pored over the documents, piecing together the puzzle. At first, he told himself it was just curiosity. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was afraid. The more he uncovered, the more certain he became that this treasure hadn't simply been forgotten. Someone had hidden it. Someone had gone to great lengths to ensure no one ever found it. And now, Mark had it all. One evening, as he left the storage facility after checking the unit again, he spotted two figures loitering near the entrance. They weren't part of the usual crowd of bidders. Their faces were shadowed, their posture too tense, too alert. Mark's stomach dropped. Were they watching him? Had they been there before? He quickened his pace, avoiding eye contact, and slipped into his car. The entire drive home, paranoia gnawed at him. Every set of headlights in his rearview mirror felt like a threat. By the time he pulled into his driveway, his nerves were frayed to the breaking point. He locked the garage behind him, sank to the cold concrete floor, and buried his face in his hands. The gold wasn't just wealth. It was a curse, one that had already begun to consume him. Mark barely slept. Each night, while his wife and daughter rested peacefully behind closed doors, he sat alone in the garage surrounded by the glittering chaos of his discovery. The gold coins seemed to gleam even in the dim light, their surfaces catching the smallest flicker of the hanging bulb like cold fire. The letters, photographs, and brittle papers lay scattered across the workbench, whispering silent stories of lives that had crumbled long before his time. But for Mark, they were no longer just relics. They were judges, staring at him through the faces in faded photographs, accusing him of stealing what was never his. At work, the warehouse felt distant, unreal. The endless rhythm of clattering pallets and shouting coworkers became background noise, drowned beneath the pounding of his thoughts. His body moved on autopilot, lifting and carrying boxes, but his mind was trapped in that garage, sifting through coins, documents, and questions he couldn't answer. What if someone is looking for this? What if the people I saw outside the facility know what I found? What if they come for me? Or worse, for my family? Mark began to investigate, though cautiously, afraid of drawing attention. He took notes on every name he found in the letters and deeds, tracing them like fragile threads through time. Late at night, he scoured online archives, old census records, even ancient newspaper articles. During his lunch breaks, he visited the public library, hunched over microfilm readers and genealogy databases like a detective chasing a ghost. The more he uncovered, the darker the picture became. This family, whoever they were, had once been wealthy and powerful. Their name appeared on land deeds, business contracts, and even court cases. But as the years passed, the records grew tangled with lawsuits, betrayals, and disappearances. Some members of the family had died young, their deaths listed in brittle, yellowed obituaries. Others simply vanished, their trails ending without explanation. Addresses dissolved into ruins, phone numbers disconnected decades ago. It was like trying to follow footsteps in a storm. Still, Mark pressed on. Every time he thought he'd reached a dead end, another clue would emerge: a half-legible signature, a newspaper clipping, a cryptic line in a letter. But no matter how deep he dug, he found no living heirs. The family line seemed to have withered away entirely, leaving nothing but the treasure in his garage, and the questions clawing at his conscience. One night, while sorting through a bundle of documents, Mark found something that made his breath catch. It was an envelope sealed with a cracked wax stamp, tucked beneath stacks of older papers. The paper was fragile, on the verge of crumbling. Carefully, he unfolded it. Inside was a draft of a will. The handwriting was shaky, hurried, as though written in desperation. At the bottom, beneath a list of property divisions and names, was a single haunting line: "If no rightful heir may be found, let it remain in trust, not to be squandered." Mark's chest tightened. The words seemed to echo in his mind, louder than the ticking of the clock on the wall. It felt as if they were written for him, as if the writer had somehow known that, decades later, a stranger would stumble upon this legacy. But what did it mean to remain in trust? Was he now the keeper of this fortune? Or was he a thief who had pried open a door that was never meant to be unlocked? At home, the tension became unbearable. His wife noticed his distracted glances, his sudden bursts of anger at trivial things. His daughter grew quieter, watching him with worried eyes. Mark wanted to explain, but how could he tell them the truth? How could he say that while they worried about bills and groceries, there was a fortune hidden just a few feet away, a fortune that could change their lives forever, but at a terrible cost? Instead, he lied. He said he was just tired from work, just stressed. But deep inside, he knew the truth. The treasure was consuming him. He was no longer just a husband and father. He was a man standing on a razor's edge between greed and morality. The paranoia grew worse. Mark began checking the locks on the garage 3, 4, 5 times each night. Every creak of the house made him flinch. Every passing car sent his heart racing. He stopped sleeping entirely, pacing the garage floor until dawn, the coins and goblets gleaming like watchful eyes in the dark. "You can't keep it all," a voice inside him whispered. "You can't give it all away, either." The words of the will haunted him. The family's history haunted him. His own desperation haunted him most of all. Finally, one sleepless night, Mark made a decision. He couldn't destroy the treasure. He couldn't surrender it completely. And he couldn't live with himself if he kept it all. So he chose a middle path. He would divide the fortune in half. One half would belong to him and his family, to pay off debts, rebuild their lives, and secure a future. The other half he would protect, preserve, and keep hidden in case rightful heirs ever appeared. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was balance. A way to honor the dead without condemning the living. At dawn, Mark set to work. His hands trembled as he laid out coins, goblets, paintings, and documents into 2 separate piles. Each division felt like a wound. Each object carried weight, not just in gold but in history. By the time the sun rose, his back ached and his eyes burned, but for the first time in weeks, he felt a flicker of clarity. He wasn't free, not yet. But he had made a choice. And in that choice, there was strength. Still, as he sat staring at the 2 piles, doubts crept in like shadows at the edge of dawn. Was half enough? Would the ghosts of the past accept this compromise? Or had he merely split the curse into 2 equal parts? Mark didn't have the answers. All he knew was that the weight of his decision would follow him forever, heavier than any gold coin he had ever held. The weeks that followed felt surreal, as if Mark were walking through someone else's life. On the surface, everything seemed to improve. He paid off overdue bills one by one, carefully, quietly, never all at once to avoid drawing attention. The final notice envelopes stopped arriving. The constant arguments with his wife eased into calmer conversations. Even his daughter began to smile more, relieved by the subtle changes she didn't fully understand. The apartment, once shabby and suffocating, began to transform. A fresh coat of paint covered the peeling walls. The old, mismatched furniture was replaced piece by piece with sturdy, modest upgrades. Nothing extravagant, nothing that might spark suspicion, just small, deliberate steps toward a better life. To anyone looking in from the outside, the family appeared to be slowly, steadily recovering from years of struggle. But inside Mark's mind, there was no peace. Every improvement, every new purchase, every quiet evening at home came with a whisper of guilt. He knew the truth. These comforts were bought with ghosts, with coins and relics that didn't truly belong to him. Mark's late-night rituals didn't end. When his wife and daughter were asleep, he would slip into the garage and sit before the two piles he had created. The half he kept, his family's lifeline, the wealth he dared to claim. The half he preserved, a silent promise to the past, waiting for rightful heirs who might never appear. The room was always silent, but Mark could almost hear the weight of history pressing in around him. The letters seemed to whisper as he read them over and over, the photographs staring with hollow, unblinking eyes. Some nights, he imagined those long-dead family members stepping out of the shadows to confront him. Other nights, he thought of the two men he'd seen loitering near the storage facility. Were they still out there, watching, waiting for him to slip? Or had they already forgotten the container entirely, leaving him to his private torment? He didn't know which possibility frightened him more. Mark had once believed the treasure would free him. Instead, it became a cage. At first, the gold had gleamed with promise, the end of debt, the chance to build a new future. But now, it glared at him like a silent accusation. Every coin was a choice he couldn't undo. Every goblet, every painting, every brittle letter was a reminder of the impossible line he had crossed. Even during the day, when he forced himself to smile at his wife or joke with his daughter, he felt like an imposter. They thought he had simply been lucky at work, maybe received a small inheritance. They never questioned it deeply. Perhaps they didn't want to. And Mark couldn't tell them the truth. To speak it aloud would make it real. It would open doors that could never be closed again. So he kept the secret locked inside himself, just as tightly as he kept the garage door bolted every night. Months passed. Life on the surface grew better, brighter. His daughter started bringing friends home again. His wife began to look at him with a softness he hadn't seen in years. But Mark knew the truth. Happiness built on hidden foundations is fragile. Sometimes, he would catch his wife watching him, her expression thoughtful, almost suspicious. Other times, his daughter would ask casual questions that made his heart race. "Dad, where did you get the money for this? Is work paying you more now?" He would laugh and deflect, but each lie felt heavier than the last. One rainy evening, Mark sat alone in the garage, staring at the two divided piles. Water dripped steadily from a leak in the roof, tapping against the concrete floor in a slow, rhythmic beat. The coins gleamed in the dim light, mocking him with their cold, indifferent shine. He thought about the line in the will, "If no rightful heir may be found, let it remain in trust, not to be squandered." He whispered the words aloud, his voice hoarse. They sounded different now, heavier, more final. Mark realized that no matter how carefully he divided the treasure, no matter how noble his intentions, he had already squandered something far more precious, his peace of mind. The wealth had saved his family from poverty, yes, but it had also chained him to a secret he would carry until his last breath. Sometimes, Mark imagined a future where someone knocked on his door, a lawyer, perhaps, or a descendant of the family he had read about in those letters. In his mind, he rehearsed what he would say, how he would explain the division he had made, the half he had kept, the half he had preserved. But deep down, he knew no explanation would ever be enough. The past cannot be bargained with. It either claims you entirely or haunts you forever. One night, as the rain turned to a soft mist outside, Mark lit a single candle in the garage. The flame flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. He sat cross-legged on the cold concrete, staring at the two piles, one bright, one dim, like reflections of his own divided soul. He thought of the day he had first seen the rusted container door swing open. The rush of hope. The surge of disbelief. The way his heart had leapt at the sight of gold. If he had known then what he knew now, would he still have raised his hand to bid? Mark couldn't answer. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The treasure had never truly been free. It had come with a price, one he would be paying for the rest of his life. As dawn crept through the thin crack beneath the garage door, Mark blew out the candle and sat in darkness, listening to the quiet hum of the waking world. The story of the forgotten container wasn't about riches won or lost. It was about the choice he had made, and the burden that choice carried. And though no one else might ever know what lay hidden beneath his modest life, Mark understood the truth. Sometimes the greatest treasure isn't gold or silver, but the lies we tell to protect the people we love. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, as if confessing to the shadows, "This secret stays with me, forever." Outside, the sun rose over the town, its light bright and warm. But inside the garage, among the piles of wealth divided in two, the shadows never left.